Okay, welcome to the Fatal Vision podcast. This is James McGinnis, joined as always by Billy, and we are breaking our usual format of going through the text of the book and offering our insights and opinions. And tonight we have a very special guest, uh, Mr. Jim Blackburn of the 1979 criminal trial. And it's an honor to have you, Jim. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. Good to see you both.
Good to see you. Yeah. So we were just getting warmed up here, just chatting a little bit, but I just wanted to say, on the record that um, my dad always had just the highest regard for you, Jim, and I do remember you came up to my house maybe when I was about 9 years old for a visit, and I'm just glad to be back in your presence. It's great to sort of come back to you. And I've listened to several of your episodes on grit, especially, I mean, the ones about my dad, and the stories you shared were really great to me. It sort of helped me feel close to him in his absence.
Yeah, he was such a good friend to me. He's such a good friend to me. And he was a great writer, even if he would write you a letter. I mean,
Yeah.
his letters were not your typical letters. They would go on with 2 or 3 pages and have quotes from all kinds of literary people and all this sort of thing. He was just really a very good writer. I'm
Yeah.
sorry he is gone, but
Well,
he was a
thank you.
great person, great friend.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and that's why we're here too, is we are doing this podcast, Billy and I, because we've been fans of the book for a long time, and I've been rereading it basically every year the last few years. I've just come to sort of engage with it as a literary masterpiece in a way that I never did when he was alive, and seeing it in a new light of um, how it came to be. And uh, what I what I wanted to bring you into the discussion, Jim, was just interested to know how you felt coming into the trial when you found out that uh, Joe McGinnis was going to be there. If that, how did that make you feel?
Awful. Just awful. The last thing I wanted was for him to be here. I knew who he was. I had read his book about the selling of the president, 1968. I knew he was a great writer, and I was completely confident that the other side, MacDonald's side, was bringing him here not only to write the book, but to make us look stupid and like we were Southern hicks, and that I thought he would be successful in that. You know, because we weren't New York type lawyers or even California lawyers. We were Southern lawyers. Even Brian Murtaugh,
Yeah.
Brian was a combination of the Yankee and the Southerner, I guess. But I was concerned about it. I wasn't happy. I never actually even spoke to your dad during the entire trial and only spoke to him at the information desk or the reception desk at the John Marshall Hotel in Richmond in December. I think it was December of 79 when we were up there for the arguments to the Fourth Circuit. It may have, I'm not sure of the month, but that's the only time I met him. The first time I
Okay.
met him. I saw him, of course, every day, but I didn't meet him.
So you coming into the trial, Jim, were you expecting a certain amount of publicity regardless? I mean, it was a very famous case, and
Well, I don't know that I thought it was a well-known case. I thought it would get a lot of attention, some publicity. It would be in the newspapers, all that sort of stuff. I was not unaware of that. I did not, however, think it would become what it became,
yeah.
and I think a large part of that is frankly due to your dad's book. I think because it kept it going past the years of the conviction and the appeal and the overturning of the appeal. Those sorts of things happen all the time in the United States history and the judicial system. What does not happen all the time is that a best-selling book made into an NBC miniseries comes out about a case. That happens, but it's rare. And it happened in this case.
How did you come to be the prosecuting attorney on the case? I know would have been Victor Warheide if he hadn't
Victor
have died.
Ward, Victor Warheide had passed away, I think.
Yeah,
I think, as Brian told me, he had a heart attack while he was going to a local store to get some Tabasco sauce.
yeah.
That would be the way that Brian would tell the story.
It's on
Is
680 of
that
Fatal Vision. Yep, that's what it says. Tabasco
that's what?
sauce. Confirming.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's amazing what you can remember. And then the second lawyer, they had another lawyer, assistant United States attorney, who was going to work on the case, and he had to leave the U.S. attorney's office, and so he left, and there was nobody there. And so when I joined the U.S. attorney's office in October of 1977, the case was still pending in the United States Supreme Court. It hadn't yet come back, but people thought it would come back because the Supreme Court had accepted certiorari, which meant that they wanted to say something about it. They would never have accepted certiorari if they were just going to let the Fourth Circuit's decision overturning the conviction stand. So we thought it was going to come back, but there was nobody there. There's absolutely no one there. And I joined the United States Attorney's Office in October, and within a month or two, uh, the United States Attorney George Anderson indicated to me that he would like for me to work on the case, and so I did.
And how long was that before the trial? How long did you know you were going to be working it
Well, I
trying?
knew about it from the fall of '77 till the summer of
Okay.
'79, but I will be honest with you, I don't think we did much on the case in '77. What I did was when I got there, the case had no organization. There was no back then we had filing cabinets. I mean, not everything was spread around. You could see stuff in the lunchroom, all this on the floor in boxes. There was no organization. So I had a friend who was a administrator there who had been in the army as a sergeant. And good Lord, he could organize everything. He took charge and he spent 2 or 3 months getting it all together, organizing it, putting it in folders, doing a list of what was available. And I would read through it. I would take some of the grand jury transcripts, for example, home and read them. I would look at some of the books of the photographs of the crime scene, and I would compare them to some of what I had, read in the grand jury transcripts. I read, for example, Freddie Kassab. I read Jeffrey MacDonald. I thought the real hero, there were two heroes, I thought, of the grand jury. One was Victor Warheide,
Yeah.
who would have been a marvelous, marvelous prosecutor of this case. He really would have been. And Paul Stumbaugh,
Yeah.
who was an FBI agent. Paul would later become an outstanding witness and would be an expert in 3 or 4 different categories, so he could give opinion testimony. And during the spring of '79, prior to the trial starting in July, we didn't have email and we didn't have technology like we do today. So Paul would write me letters, long letters, indicating what I should look at, how we should put it together. We would talk on the phone. I would write him back. And we had this correspondence, and he was a tutor of mine about how to handle the case. He really was very good. He was very knowledgeable about the case. Probably knew more about the case than anybody except for Brian Murtaugh, who I think knows more about it than anybody else in the world. I
Before
was a late I
yeah.
was a late comer to it, really.
Well, it's like kind of sort of like the quarterback is down and then they call you sort of step in off the bench and
That's
the whole
that's
the whole
that's right.
game's in your
Except it
hands.
wasn't. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Uh, and everyone, what was the sort of when I go back and look at videos of MacDonald talking, there's before the trial, during the trial, read about what he's saying at Fatal Vision, and it just seems as if the conventional wisdom, at least in the media and on the ground, was that he was just coming there to get a quick acquittal and then head home.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
And then one other piece I was just rereading, it looked like some of the early coverage of the trial was suggesting that the prosecution was off to a shaky start. That's how it
That
was
was your
covered.
dad's that was your dad's view also. And that's in Fatal Vision in the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will have to be honest with you, I disagree completely with that reporting. And the reason I disagree, I understand why they said it, but they misconstrued what we were trying to do. We had about 9 or 10 MPs. Okay. The crime scene was a shambles. And the military in the Article 32 hearing, initially in 70, called all of the MPs to the witness stand, which was, I think, a mistake. Because, every time all you can do is get people being inconsistent with one another. And so we decided we would only call two.
Hmm.
Richard Tavere, who was the first MP into the House, and Ken Micah, who was the one who said he thought he saw a woman in a floppy hat
Right.
and on the side of the street. And I didn't necessarily believe Ken Micah, but I brought him to Raleigh. I brought them both to Raleigh, both Richard and Ken to Raleigh. I didn't do it over the phone. I made them come to see me. And I went over it with him, and I decided I was going to put him on as our second witness because we did not want to hide him from the jury so they could put him on and say we were afraid of him. And
Right.
besides, if we put him on as a second witness, by the time the jury would get the case about a month and a half later, he would be old news.
Yeah.
And so then I tried to find a way to distinguish what he said he saw between what we thought. And he basically said he was driving, you remember, in the rain in the early morning to perhaps a murder scene or a death scene. And he notices a girl has nice looking legs. I thought that was odd.
Yeah.
So Helena had always said that she was wearing high top boots. Now I agree that you can have nice legs and still be wearing boots, but that gave me something to say with a straight face to the jury that was a little bit inconsistent. Not much, but just enough that I could say that with a straight face to distinguish. I didn't try to call Ken Micah not telling the truth, but I put him on. But in saying we were off to a shaky start, it probably looked like we were off to a shaky start by putting him on.
Mhm.
And it probably looked like we were off to a shaky start by putting Richard DeVere on because they could cross-examine him about all the things that he didn't do right or the way the crime scene looked and all that kind of stuff. But the truth of the matter is, if we could get through the crime scene alive, and make a
Yeah.
C, a gentleman's C, if we could get a C out of it, we were on our way.
Right.
Yeah.
We were afraid of an F,
Right.
what the military had. So I understand why they thought that. Even Wade Smith, I think he says in the book, said this is not going to be as hard as we thought.
Right.
That's because I don't think the defense ever understood where we were going, what we were doing. Once we got into the trial, our inexperience, while I'm certainly showed in some of the trial of the case, we weren't afraid of them any longer.
Yeah.
You tend to be afraid of what you don't know, I think.
Well, what's always striking to me is, and kind of jumping ahead, but after you cross-examine MacDonald, they think that they had according to my dad, and they were acting like they just won the whole thing. Like,
Agree
oh, I
with
think
that.
I told MacDonald says, I think he's afraid of me. I told you he was. and Wade is saying, the case is basically over. Um, and I think, is that because they thought you left a lot of the powder dry, like you didn't bring up all of his anything to do with his
It's too
character?
nice. I was
Yeah.
too nice. I was just too nice. If I had one wish, and I think to some degree they may have been correct. Now, if you read the transcript of the cross-examination, it reads a lot better than it actually was. It makes me look better, in all honesty, than I think I did. But I think I was too nice. Though my goal was not to be Perry Mason. My goal was to put the physical evidence back in front of MacDonald and have him not be able to explain it so I could argue that to the jury. I was trying to set it up for the closing arguments.
That's
At
that
the
whole
same
should
time,
the jury find this? Should the
yeah,
jury
yeah,
find that? Yeah.
yeah. And that's what I think that was effective.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I will have to say to you that if I could have one wish in my life, I would like to have the first 15 minutes of my cross-examination of MacDonald over again, because I know how I would do it today. It would be so different. I wouldn't ask him anything about the case. My first question, first what I'd do when the judge said he's with you, I wouldn't say anything for about 30, 40 seconds, make everybody get a little nervous. There's something wrong with it. And then finally say, Dr. MacDonald, tell me about Carolyn. I don't know who Carolyn is. I just made that
Yeah.
name up. But he
Yeah.
had lots of one night stand.
Yeah.
And then I'd play around with that for a while because he wouldn't be expecting that.
Yeah.
Then ask about a second one. Then I go to the third one. And by the third one, Siegel would be exasperated, would stand up and say, we object. This is getting repetitious. And I would like to stand up and say, that it certainly is repetitious, Your Honor. I would agree with it. That's how I like to start.
Yeah.
Basically, I would like to have had fun with it. I didn't have fun. I think cross-examination in a case like that, I know it's serious and you trying to get some, but you have to have a little bit of fun in the chase of the thing, or the chase of the person to see if you can catch him. But
Did you look at Warheide at the grand jury, sort of turning him into a absolute wreck on the stand and just leaving him like there? He was cursing and he lost all composure. And um, at the grand jury, when you look at the grand jury transcript, like Warheide was just relentless until he just broke MacDonald down into it, like sort of a mess. And did you look at that as sort of a roadmap of what to do and what not to do for yourself?
a little bit, but I was very prepared for it. I was over
Yeah.
prepared. I
Yeah.
had too much stuff. You don't really need that much stuff. You need a few principles to go after him and go after him hard. But yeah, I looked at a lot of what Warheide did. I thought he did break MacDonald down a
Yeah.
lot. MacDonald lost his composure completely. I don't think he would have done that in the jury trial because the stakes were so high there.
Yeah.
And he would have had his lawyers to interrupt him and stop it.
That's right. It's a very different, obviously different format. Do you think that McDonald never ever thought it would come to trial, even after he was
No,
indicted? He
no,
thought he was
no.
off.
He thought, no. I mean, no. He thought he was going to win it. I think he thought he was going to win until he didn't.
Yeah.
I think the real truth is the press thought he was going to win too. Now they did say after our closing argument, the day we gave the closing argument, they did come up to me and say, "Well, you all did pretty well. I think you've made a good case. I just think it's too late."
Oh yeah.
The press did not want to admit they might have been mistaken, but the press also would come to court at 10 o'clock or 10:30 and leave at 3 and think they had the whole day, and they would miss a
Yeah.
lot during they not all of them were there. I remember that Siegel asked the question to him, says, "Why have you not remarried?" He said, "Because I can't get over the loss of my wife and children." And one of the female reporters said, "That ain't what he said to me last night."
Oh. Wow.
I mean, so there was a lot of that in the case, So the press likes a good story. And the story of this case would not be that he got convicted. The story would have been how he beat it and got off, that would have been the story that they were chasing.
And he throughout the 9 years between the murder and what Billy and I were just talking about is just his character, and what is so chilling to me, um, is that he was completely able to live a functional life and enjoy his freedom. And I mean, because I'm sure you've seen a lot of people commit murder, try to lie about it, hide from the truth, and he never has. To our knowledge, he's never cracked at once. He's never admitted that he did it to anybody, and that seems so. That's what's so haunting to me about it is he still keeps the truth to himself, even as we sit here tonight.
Well, I agree with you. And that would give me second thoughts on whether or not he was guilty, except for the fact that I think if any rational, logical person looks at the evidence, the physical evidence, the scientific evidence, and couples that with his statements of what he said happened, they're totally contradictory. They're totally contradictory. And I think the evidence just proves that he did it.
Oh,
And
and the story is so preposterous from the very beginning. And with if you go back to the night of the murder, he was saying, "I'm never going to help those acid heads again." He sort of gets ahead of himself. He in the very beginning, he's implying that he might have known the intruders, and then he settles on a different account by the sixth, and then by Article 32, he has a whole different. He's tries to finesse it again. Um, at what point do you think he made sort of his like how he almost got away with it? What did he do in terms of his story that made it possible for him to be brought back to North Carolina 9 years later?
he wasn't nice to Freddie Kassab.
Wow.
He wasn't, he wasn't, he didn't maintain his friendship with Freddie Kassab. He dissed him. He dissed Mildred. And he hid things from him, which they found out. He lied to them about killing someone. Freddie caught him. Freddie read the transcript of his Article 32, and it was inconsistent. Inconsistent is a nice word with what Freddie knew to be the truth. But the real mistake that he made was, not keeping Freddie closer. Freddie may have gone after him anyway, but it would have been more difficult for Freddie to do that if he hadn't. If when Jeff came back east from California, he went to see them and visit with them and call them and write them all this stuff. He didn't do that. I understand in part why he didn't do it, but it was a big mistake.
Well, Freddie was making him nervous with his continued interest in trying to find who did it. And
Oh,
Jeff
yes.
was
He
saying,
said
"Well, we
Jeff,
got to move on. We have to just get over it."
That
And
was the reason behind the call where he lied
yeah,
about having caught one of the hippies and killed him. The one
and
down,
just
three to go
yeah, right.
call.
but he misjudged Freddie.
Yeah.
Freddie was not who he thought he was. We all should have a dad like Freddie.
Yeah.
I mean, if something bad happens to you or happens to your wife, all young girls should have a dad like Freddie who will just spare nothing. I mean, nothing to go after him. Now, Freddie didn't win the trial. He didn't even testify at the trial. Uh, and once Freddie had filed the complaint that got the special grand jury session started, Freddie sort of fades away to some degree from his involvement. And Freddie was responsible for getting it to the grand jury as much as anybody. He is the one who convinced Judge Butler in Clinton, North Carolina, to swear in a special grand jury in 1974 against MacDonald. Without Freddie doing that, if Freddie had not come to North Carolina to file that complaint for murder against his former son-in-law, I don't know that it would have happened, because the United States Attorney's Office and the United States Justice Department were not interested in pursuing it in the early 1970s. They didn't think they could win.
Right.
They thought it was a circumstantial evidence case with no motive, is what they thought.
Is part of that because of McDonald's supposed charisma, or the his attractiveness, or the way people seem to be charmed by him, or all the things that he says about himself, that he's just the best?
Yeah, he was a doctor and all that sort of stuff. And
Yeah.
it's just like a life. You tell it often enough and repeat the same story over and over and over again, people say, God, it must be true, or something like that. He doesn't, like, any question that haunts you, that he still say. That's the secret. He keeps saying that.
Well,
He,
that
he
drives
may
me
believe,
crazy.
he may
That
believe in that. Who knows what he believes now? I don't know.
the
It's
last time
really,
this case was in the news was in 2012, and that's where they introduced every segment saying he's always maintained his innocence, as if that, like, you win a prize after a certain number of years, and then you just get to be credibly falsely accused. Uh, what did you think of his story? Or what did you think of him as a man, as a character, when you first encountered him?
I thought he was a jerk. I've
Yeah.
always thought he was a jerk.
Hmm.
I will use the term that the Democrats use now. I think it's sort of weird, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, but I can see how he would charm you. He can be charming, I think, and so he charmed lots of people.
Jim, when we talked on the phone in preparation for this episode, you told me this isn't even a very hard case. It's not that complicated. When you actually look at the physical evidence, it's kind of a slam dunk. So, what do you think accounts for the years and years and years of debate over this that persists even to this day? Admittedly, among far fewer people than in the past, but why do
Well,
people still argue about this?
I will tell you that the thing that I thought Brian and I did right in this case, one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons we won, we took a mess of stuff, of exhibits, of lab results, and everything like this, what they did found and didn't find, and wove it into a story or a narrative that was relatively simple and relatively straightforward and easy to understand.
Hmm.
That wasn't automatic. I mean, that took a lot of time to do. And it may be that we were able to do it so successfully because we didn't overthink it. We didn't try to make it something that it was not. I've always thought that one of the reasons, among others, that the DA's office lost the O.J. Simpson case was that they overthought it and tried to put everything in the world in there.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, we were going to put in some of the women that he'd had affairs with in evidence. Judge Spree allowed that. And after I met with a number of them, and I remember telling Snowball one night after talking to several of the girls, I said, well, Paul, we got good news and bad news. He said, what's the good news? The good news is they all said they slept with him. He said, what's the bad news? The bad news is they still like him. So, I mean, why put that in there? Why do that if it's not going to help us get to the result? This wasn't a divorce domestic case, you know. We were just trying to muddy up his character. But nothing muddies up his character quite as much as proving he killed his family. The rest of it's window dressing. And what we were able to do is prove that he killed his family. Why people don't understand it now is because it takes about 15. You can't put this on a bumper sticker. You can't do that. It takes about 20 minutes. It would take a long line of cars and bumper stickers to tell this story. But once you tell, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes. to tell the story. But once you tell it, you got people for the most part, except the true believers.
Oh, the part that, yeah, I think if I was going to point to one example is the way they handled it in the movie with having Stamba's, the actor playing Stamba, narrate over a silent with no music, just what the blood suggests.
The
Um,
best part of the movie, there are 3 or 4 minutes in the movie that are good.
yeah.
That's all you need to see. That's all you need to see.
Yeah.
It's that FBI agent with Freddie, played by Carl Malden, and they got a diagram of the house. And Freddie says to the FBI agent, "Tell me what happened." And the agent takes 3 or 4 minutes and goes through it, room by room, and that's it. That's the case. I thought the movie did really well on that. That's if you want to uh, have somebody on this podcast, I think would be a great. If one of the best things to do is to have a diagram like on a poster board or somehow you can show it, and maybe one of you all or someone to go through it and say, here's where the blood is, here's where they laid, here's where this happened, and you can always tell a sequence of the story, and it all makes sense. There are not any inconsistencies. Wade and Bernie Siegel did not grasp that quite as fully as they should have. How devastating that would be.
It- Is that because they thought just because there was some errors in the evidence gathering by the MPs that they could credibly just dismiss all the physical evidence as tainted?
I think that's what Bernie thought. I don't know if that's what Wade thought. I don't know. I don't know that for sure with either one, but I certainly believe that's what Bernie thought. I don't know about Wade.
Well, what was Bernie's when Bernie did his infamous closing argument?
I
Uh,
love it. Loved it. Just loved it. It's
what
like
was he?
being friends with Briar Patch.
I've never had the been able to sit down and read the whole transcript, but what was he even what was he talking about? Was it just the
Well,
injustice?
he tried to make MacDonald the victim.
Yeah,
He tried to make MacDonald was not the victim in this case. The victims were the victims who got killed. He took his eye off that. They tried to make Jeffrey MacDonald a wrongly charged defendant victim that the government had been pursuing all these years. Bernie even says to the jury, the real victim in this case you haven't heard about. The real victim is MacDonald. He says that in the first 30 minutes of his closing argument. It's wonderful. It's also, I think it's also not smart.
no. Do you think he'd already won at that point, though?
No, no,
No.
you don't think you've won until you've won.
What did
I
you
thought,
expect?
well, I thought after the closing arguments were over, what I thought was that we had proved that he did it. We had proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. And I thought we had better arguments to that effect.
Hmm.
But I was still fearful that it's really hard to get 12 people unanimously to agree on that. And, but they did in a relatively short order. Uh, and I don't know how long the jury was out. It was 5 or 6 hours, I think, in the first day. And but I don't think we thought we won until it was over. I think when I first got hopeful was when the jury came back in and the first juror through the door was crying and couldn't hardly walk. And then the
Yeah.
second one did the same thing. Then I thought something's happened.
I mean, when you look at what Wade said in that Wilderness of documentary, uh, Wilderness of Era documentary, he says if he had gotten his time, he might have been able to persuade one juror. to go into a hung. So it just strikes me as so his
He might
he
have. He might have. I
he
can't
might
argue with
have,
that.
but he wasn't saying he could have gotten an acquittal at all. He was saying he might
I
have
don't
been
think
able. Yeah,
I don't think MacDonald would have been acquitted. I think
no
he
way. Yeah.
possibly could have got a hung jury with Wade getting one juror or two jurors. But I will tell you, one of the conversations that I had with Brian Murtaugh uh, when we were coming down and getting ready, sometime during the afternoon, waiting for the jury to come back. We were walking down the steps from the 8th to the 7th floor. Our office was on the 8th floor, the courtroom was on the 7th. I turned to Brian in the stairwell and said, "Okay, Brian, if it's a hung jury, are we going to try him again? We got to have an answer for the public. We got to know what we're going to say." He looks at me and says, "You want to tell Freddie we're not going to do it again?" I said, I mean, so that's it. We were going to do it. We would have tried him a second time.
Okay. So that's that answers that. I mean, we have a little bit of time left. I kind of want to talk about the how you got to know my dad a little bit. You said you ran into him at one of the Fourth Circuit appeals. When did he sort of try to court you to try to get you to talk to him? Was it
Well, he
gradual?
wrote sometime after that, after the first of the year in 1980, he writes me a letter, a complimentary letter on trying the case, and asking for my participation in talking with him about the book and also my help in talking to some of the other people on our side. I was sort of the key to opening up other people to cooperate with your dad. I wasn't the only one responsible for that, but I was the first one. And so I did. I think he came to Raleigh several times, and he interviewed me at some length. We interviewed at my home. We interviewed at a restaurant. I don't remember other places, but we talked off and on many times. I'm sure we talked over the phone, and I began to relax with him. Your dad was very good at making somebody relax, talk to him,
Mhm.
which is a talent. It's one reason
Yeah.
he was such a good writer of books. He could get people to open up to them. I could have opened up to him and then he could have slammed us, but he didn't do that. But we were also the case. We were also the side that had won the case. It would be a better book to write it with our side because we had won.
Yeah.
You know, it would be a
Uh,
better book to write how he got convicted as opposed to he was wrongfully convicted, I think.
no, clearly, and I think he knew that, and um, he, I would tell you that he said he knew that many times. I did want to before we jump too far ahead, Billy, that you had something that was in the actual book that you
Oh,
wanted to talk.
well, so Joe gives the title to part five to you. It's cry one for them, and then it includes that amazing passage from your closing argument. And it's just so it's so moving. I think Joe also closed Final Vision with the same passage, right?
Yes.
And he says it's not too late to do that. I mean, it's such an incredible um, piece of rhetoric. I've always wondered how you came up with that. Was it the night before it struck you? Was it written down before the cry one for them, light a candle for them? What's the story
I wrote
behind it?
it. Yeah, I think I wrote it down on a long yellow legal pad. Um, my thoughts. I was thinking about candles because there were a lot of candles in the house. I was angry at the jury because I thought they were crying when he was testifying, like they were sympathetic to him. And I remember having a disagreement with a reporter with the Raleigh News Observer named Jenny Carroll. And she said, she said, Jim, you need to cool it. If you get angry at the jury, you're going to blow this case. Because I was really angry about it. So I went home that night and sat in the backyard. And I had this is going to sound hokey, but this is the truth. I remembered a long time ago a movie that I had seen where Bing Crosby plays a priest and Debbie Reynolds is a young girl. The name of the movie is Say One for Me. And I took that line of Say One for Me and turned it into what it became in the closing argument.
It's
And
beautiful.
after and at the end of the trial that day of the closing arguments, I walked back to the counsel table and Jenny was on the front row of the press. And I went there, I says, "You got any idea where that came from?" And she says, "Yes." And she guessed it. She's the only person that ever guessed it right, but she guessed it. But that's where it became. But I wanted to make the family, the little girls and the mom, I wanted the jury to remember them. They were the ones who were the real losers in this case. I mean, it's true MacDonald spent his life in prison, but at least he was alive.
Yep.
Both his mother and Mildred, Colette's mother, were both grandmothers. They both lost. Freddie lost, just dad was gone. And so, but the ones who couldn't come back were the family. And I think people too often forget that in murder cases. It's not just about the defendant, it's about the people who lost their lives. And this was a really, this case cried out for somebody to talk about them, I think, because MacDonald tried to obliterate them from the trial.
One of the things
Well
that,
said. Well said. Yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead, James.
I was just one of the things that I always am amazed by is the there's a part in Fatal Vision where my dad's writes about how he visited the apartment Castle Drive, and then that night he had a dream about Colette um, on the witness stand, uh, talking to Jeff from the witness stand, and that just still just even talking about it gives me chills. I was curious if you've ever felt that level of involvement where it's sort of mystical, spiritual, how uncanny. Do you ever feel like the Colette, Kimmy, and Christy are part of you?
Not in the sense that I had a dream about it, but in the sense that I feel like I know them.
Yeah.
I feel like I know them. I knew her mom very well and knew Freddie very well. Uh, but I've always sensed that I knew them and that I was on their side. I think I put in a picture in evidence of Kimberly, the older. She had long blonde hair. She's lying on a slab, naked, dead. You don't see her whole body. You see the top part of her body and her hair. Her face is looking right at the camera. I put it into evidence. It had no evidentiary value of any kind whatsoever, but you would certainly never have objected to it going into evidence. And I put into evidence for the simple reason that I wanted the jury to see how pretty a girl she was and how sad that was. That's what I remember. That's the picture that I remember the most of this case. It was a black and white picture, wasn't color, which made it even more haunting.
Yeah,
That's how I'd answer that.
yeah. Thank you.
Was your faith a factor in how you pursued this case? You spoke about in the closing argument, there's a part where you talk about the gospel and Judas Iscariot and things like that.
liked that line about Judas Iscariot.
It's quite good. Quite good.
Yeah.
I
The
mean, I
worst
know
sin
it's
of
the
all.
South. I know it's the South, and and all of that. But I think it would play in, frankly, in most places in the country. It happened to be true from all that we know.
Hmm.
But sure, sure. Uh, I don't normally quote the Bible, or I didn't in closing arguments, but I was trying to figure out how to take away his character testimony, the nuns and the people like that who were testifying on his behalf. They weren't there. They didn't know. They liked him. They didn't think he could have done it. I didn't mean he didn't do it. And I was trying to think of some way to do it.
What did you think of your dad was a member of the clergy, is that right?
Just Baptist minister. Your dad got that. Your dad called him a Methodist. He was a Baptist minister.
Okay. All right, so
I said,
we found a factual error. We found a factual error in here.
that's the only mistake I know.
Did you ever talk to him about this case?
My dad.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. Really, I didn't talk about this case. If you didn't talk to me for about 4 or 5 months before the trial, during the trial, if you didn't talk to me about the case, or you weren't involved in the case, or you didn't want to know something about the evidence of the case, I didn't talk to you. I remember a friend of mine called me from DC in the springtime, and she said, "When can I talk to you?" I said, "In about 6 months. I'll call you back." I mean, I was so consumed by it that's all I did.
Yeah. Um, what in the time we have left, I mean, what do you think? My impression is MacDonald, when he got convicted, he just thinks it's a matter of time before he's out again. And it was that it was. He was out
It
again
was.
in short order.
Yes.
Do you think if it wasn't for Freddie and Brian, that he might have gotten out at some point just through inertia or some other means, or
Uh,
was
No, I think that once he got convicted, I think the government was going to stay after him. The government was going to be relentless. There are a number of attorneys who've handled this case long since I did.
yeah.
That's been over 40 years ago. And they're just as relentless today against him as I was. For some reason, this case engenders a great deal of passion on behalf of the people who work on it. You cannot get close to this case without it consuming you. I don't know why that is, but it's a heck of a story. A story makes it too light. It's a heck of a situation. It's a life story, and it just captures everybody. And so I think once the I think Freddie, I mean Freddie's been gone a long time, since the 1990 mid 1990s, and the government is just pursued him on appeals and motions just as hard since he's been gone as they did when he was alive.
Well, one of the things that strikes me when I look back at the record is that he was in the 80s and 90s, he was on TV basically every year. There's a serial or a tabloid show who would do like a McDonald did like there was a satanic cult behind it, and there was this whole it was just endless publicity and he was front and center doing interviews on television. And then at the Larry King interview in '03 is the last time he's ever been seen on screen. And I was curious if you had any insight. Why do you think he's suddenly become averse to the camera? Do you think it's because of Catherine or like
His wife's
Your
Catherine.
guess, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Just for our
your guess
listeners
is
out there.
do what now?
Just
Oh,
for
just
our
sorry. Our
listeners.
listeners might not know his wife's name. Sorry, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I know, I've met Catherine, but I don't know why
Yeah.
he has become averse. Perhaps advice of counsel. More than likely, he's just gotten tired of it. I think he may well have given up at this point. I don't know. I never thought he would give up, but there isn't the Fourth Circuit or one of the courts said that if he filed any new motions or appeals or anything like that, he could not do so on the basis of any factual thing that he's raised before or any individual situation. That pretty much ends it. I mean, there's not much else he can say. I think he knows that he's not going to go free. And he's not going to clear his name.
No. It seemed, did you ever have any? I'll just speak from experience that my dad was mentally tortured by the ambivalence that the media would present the case with over the years, and these people who would pick up his cause, like Errol Morris or Janet Malcolm, and just sort of act like it was an open question. I was
But you always have to
curious.
keep in mind, every writer, I don't mean your dad, but these Janet Malcolm, Morris, if they don't take those positions, they don't have a story or a book or an article to write.
Yeah,
And so they're looking for an angle to write it from. And the angle can't be, well, I'm going to write another story about how he's guilty. Joe's already done that. You can't write another Fatal Vision, so to speak. Uh, but so you got to write something that's anti that. But I do agree with your dad. I can't believe, who are these people? Why do they believe that? Why does he believe that? But people do, you know, I don't know.
yeah,
But the real bottom line is that case is, gosh, it's 45 years old, I guess, this summer. And it's been challenged so many times. It's been challenged so many times. We've all been challenged. Brian was challenged for a while. I was, of course, challenged for a while. Um, but it stood and it never was reversed. Judge Dupree's decisions, rulings were never reversed. The jury decision was never reversed. That's remarkable on a case that had these many people look at it over the years. It's one of the longest running federal criminal trials in the United States history.
you never had any fear that when someone like Alan Dershowitz or the other guy from Boston, I can't remember his name, got involved, that there was any chance they could just use their star power to get some kind of create some sort of doubt in front of a incompetent judge somewhere?
No, I thought I had the judges, the district court judges in North Carolina were not incompetent. They were very good,
Good,
strong
good.
judges. And the court was not as like, but it was a conservative Supreme Court when it went up. It had gone conservative, and I think that I always thought that they would be strong. Uh, Certainly Dershowitz or the other Boston lawyer could make a show. They could get somebody like Edward Morris, whatever Morris's first name is, to write this book and so forth. You know, I don't know how well the book did. I don't know. He came to the hearing in 2012. He stayed a couple of days and he left. He didn't stay the whole time.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if that's the best he can do, that's not great. But anyway, I thought they could make a splash in publicity because of their name, but a splash in publicity is not the same as a splash in a federal courtroom.
Right.
And as you noticed, there's
Go ahead,
been,
James.
ever since that final hearing, there's been zero interest in the case because you can't make a splash anymore because it's closed. So,
I think so.
well,
What
I just
kept
want
it?
to, yeah,
Yeah, I just think that kept it alive. The possibility was getting out.
yeah, that's always, yeah, that's always, that would always just be the most dramatic thing they could do, they could happen.
Yeah, and we won't get a confession, right?
Don't think so.
Something you said in your interview, I know we're in the final minutes here, your interview in the Wilderness of Error show, I think is applicable to the whole story. You're talking about the night of the murder, and you say that the sad part is MacDonald could have stopped at any time, right? He didn't have to hit Kimberly. Christy was asleep for the initial encounter. She could have lived. But really, any time after that, like what he was putting the community through, after, what he was putting the family through. Up to this day, his dishonesty is rippling outward through people's lives, and he could have stopped at any time, and he never will. He'll never stop.
He destroyed a lot. He destroyed a number of lives.
Yeah.
He didn't destroy just the people who got killed. I mean, they were destroyed, but he destroyed other lives. He destroyed Freddie and Mildred's life. He probably destroyed his own mother's life.
Mhm.
You know, if the truth of the matter is, and some of his friends who believed him and supported him. I think I don't know that he destroyed them, but he sure didn't do him any favor. So he's been a dishonest person his whole life on this. So that's very sad. But he could have stopped. He could have stopped even after he hit Colette. He didn't have to. Colette was still alive even after he beat the you know what out of her. He could have stopped then. Now he would have been dishonorably discharged. He'd probably taken his medical license. He'd probably been prosecuted and gone to prison for a short. But he would have gotten out. He could have rebuilt his life. But more importantly, Colette and Milt and Kimberly and Kristen would have been alive. He could have done that, but he didn't.
Yeah. Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
It's really been a pleasure, and I just want to
Thank
thank
you.
you for all the work you've done to
Good.
get that verdict and have him be where he is, as we sit here tonight.
Thanks. Y'all take care. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks,
Bye,
Jim.
Jim.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.